taking an early morning walk, and we round Dolphin Road, making our pilgrimage to Cyril and Harriet Mazansky's old house on the corner of Dolphin and Mandalay. And we walk down Dolphin, and we're walking past the Ward School, and we see a driver in a car park the car and stop. And Shira and I, this is the Ward School, literally down the hill from our house. You could throw a football from my house to the Ward School. And she and I both have the same independent thought. Could that be a school shooter? Like, what is this person doing, driving and parking their car? And I kind of wonder about, like, all of this Holocaust stuff and mitzvah stuff. Does it all get drowned out by the fact that all of us are living in a crazy war zone? And I was listening to the Daily today, and I did not even know this, that there was, in the state of Texas in the last few years, there have been other school shootings where, quote unquote, only 10 kids were killed. That was like 2 years ago. Then there have been there's a school shooting in El Paso. There was a church school shooting, another school shooting, Uvalde, and and in each case, in some of the last 2 or 3 years in Texas, it got easier to get more and more lethal guns. More and more easy to get more and more lethal guns. This is in the Daily today. Listen to it. And I'm wondering, what is the impact of that current violence on the study of violence against the Jews in the 1940s? Because I do wonder and worry, does it drown out the field? Does it preempt the field? Thoughts on that? Anybody? Not meaning to be depressing, but it just is very real. Alice, I'd love to hear your voice.
How do you not teach the Holocaust in light of Charlottesville? When you have white nationalists walking in the streets yelling, "Jews will not replace us," that, God forbid, can be a first step. And that's what happened in Germany in the 1930s. That kind of thing sets the stage for something much worse. And every generation has to understand that.
So you're saying that the current violence makes understanding, the Holocaust even more important. By the way, the schools, the shooting in Buffalo of the elderly Black people in the supermarket, that guy was talking about replacement theory, which is the same verb that was used in Charlottesville. The Jews won't replace us, the Blacks won't replace us, etc. Yeah, so it's a complicated world. Let me pivot now to page 3 and 4 of the Rebbe's thing, because this is, when you think about our neshama, our soul, in the current world, it's, and all the violence and how it's easier than ever to get more guns in Texas, and no matter how many shootings, including school shootings, nothing ever changes. It's easy to go dark. So I wanted to read this and ask you for your thoughts on this. This is so countercultural. All of this is of a piece with the Rebbe's optimistic philosophy, a philosophy that had been articulated a century earlier by the third Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the man for whom Menachem Mendel Schneerson was named. A noted aphorism of the Tzemach Tzedek, and one that the Rebbe repeated over and over, was think good and it will be good. In this, the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe were in conflict with the mindset still in common in the Jewish community. A story that has long circulated in Chabad tells of a man who complained to the Rebbe that his children were assimilating. The man started to meditate aloud in a somewhat self-pitying manner. What have I done wrong? Why are they straying from the path I taught them? He sighed, schwer sein in a yid. He continued, citing an old Jewish expression whose English translation is, it's hard to be a Jew. It's well known even to many Jews who don't know Yiddish. At this point, the Rebbe asked the man if he often expressed himself in this way. And the man acknowledged that in stressful times, of which there are many, he did often cite this Yiddish saying. The Rebbe responded, then that is the message your children hear. and that is the impression of Judaism they have. The Rebbe then continued, there's another Yiddish saying, it is good to be a Jew. Switch your refrain and you will note a difference in your children's appreciation for their heritage. Okay, Rhiannon, we'll come back. So here's my question. I mean, this is so compelling and so fetching and so attractive. Who doesn't want to be drawn to that kind of optimism? But does that kind of optimism, is it viable today or is it naive today? Paul Kalis.
It can be said that I am the Pollyanna in chief. I believe in the inherent decency of most people, and I believe in what Schneerson represents. Instead of constantly being negative, he wants to be constantly positive. And with positive thoughts, things get done. Look at the success that American Jews have had in America. It's really extraordinary. And in this morning, we are concentrating on the negative. We keep talking about the Holocaust, and we should never forget the Holocaust. But teaching it to our young kids just disappears into the vapors until they reach a certain period in their own comprehension where they can understand it. So I don't know what the correct age is to emphasize it, but we should never forget. But we do have to emphasize what Jews have created, what monotheism has created, what our role in America has been in government, in medicine, in law. I made a small contribution to Chabad, and they never stopped sending emails for, educational material. And I truly believe in the power of positive thinking and how we have to move on. Pew Research shows that our constant discussion of the negative, I don't know if it's caused assimilation, but we have a tremendous amount of assimilation. So something has to change in the way we communicate with our younger people.
So Paul, I appreciate that. And, I get that. What about Maddie's concern that if you think about Max, Isabel, and Zoe, your grandchildren, Cheryl's kids, that if we don't teach them about the Holocaust, they won't know about it.
I didn't say they shouldn't be taught. It's when and how.
Yeah, and do you have any more wisdom on that?
No, all I remember is my Hebrew school experience.
Okay.
It was a long time ago, which was awful. And I used to go 5 days a week to Hebrew school. It was a burden, although I didn't know it was a burden then.
Right. Well, I will say this on the theme of optimism. I was at a wedding this weekend on Sunday in Chatham, and there's a beautiful day. Chatham's a beautiful place. The sun was shining. The bride and groom were happy and beautiful and radiant. All the guests were radiant. And while you're at the wedding, it's like Uvalde didn't happen. Or if it happened, it's not your concern. You've created a counter world of pure joy and blessing. And all the time I wonder, and this is a question I always wrestle with and I can never answer, is that the purpose of religion to create these kinds of counter worlds where Uvalde is somebody else's problem? In our world, it's the sky is blue and the bride is beautiful and the groom is beautiful and everybody's happy. Is that religion on its best day, or is that the abdication of religion? Shavuot is coming up. If we have just amazing prayer services and amazing Torah and amazing learning, is that religion functioning properly or not functioning properly? And how do we deal with the unlovely and the gruesome and the deeply painful and violent and the suffering of school children that are also very real and our problem today. And how do you do that without surrendering to, a lot of negative energy, which is a turnoff to everybody? By the way, I don't have the answer to that question.
Yeah, well, you just brought up a subject that was emphasized in the New York Times a week ago in a full-page article by a father lamenting how the child was going to be bar mitzvahed. And the child says to the father, how do I pray to a God who I don't believe in? And the letters to the editor following that, they select the letters. So, but a lot of people felt the same way. What they were saying, what good is prayer? What kind of a God is there? What action should we take to obviate what's been happening? And that's the most difficult part.
Right. Well, Paul, the end of that story, and then and Phyllis, I love your thoughts. The end of that article, by the way, was the father says the kid doesn't believe in God. The father doesn't believe in God. Who could believe in God if Uvalde happens over and over and over and over again, not to mention the Holocaust? So nobody there in their family believes in God. But the end of the story was that they did the bar mitzvah and they found it beautiful and meaningful, right? And that all these people who don't believe in God came to the bar mitzvah and they found it beautiful and meaningful and helpful. It's a counter world of meaning and blessing, even though they're praying to the God they don't believe in, but the community is gathering, and that's something they do believe in.
For many people, belief in God is like a cosine, and it goes up and down, up and down. Right. When good things happen, oh yeah, God is great. When bad things happen, where is God?
Right. Phyllis Wilker, love your thoughts, and then we're going to pivot to Dara Horn.
Sorry. On January 7th, the day after the storming of the Capitol, our granddaughter, who was in first grade, came out of her classroom in tears. And when our daughter asked her what was the matter, she said the teacher had had a discussion about what had happened on January 6th. And she had said that Black people and Jews, that people had said bad things about Black people and Jews. And our granddaughter said she always thought being Jewish was a good thing, that it meant, celebrating holidays and Shabbat and good things like that. But if people wanted to kill her, then she didn't want to be Jewish. And it made me, so when I read the Chabad statement, it really spoke to me. And I think somewhere in my growing up, learning about the Holocaust made me feel like, gee, for spite, I should be Jewish. But I realized my granddaughter was only 6 at the time. A 16-year-old would probably react differently. But I think unless we give kids a reason to be Jewish, a positive reason, that it's not going to be enough to just speak to them about dead Jews.
Mm. Yeah. By the way, not to do a spoiler alert, even Dara Horn, who came up with the phrase "people love dead Jews" and has 12 chapters of examples, how does her book end, and where does she find balm in Gilead for this problem? From Daf Yomi, from learning Torah every day. And so when she if you remember the book, and we looked at it this year, the last chapter is not only about the violence that broke out in New York and New Jersey after Pittsburgh and after San Diego, but what she found especially violent, even more than the violence, was the media violence, the way that the media accounts, quote unquote. Can you hear me now? The way that Rhiannon, I was muted. If you can make sure that I'm not muted here, thank you. The way that the media accounts gave context that exculpated the people who were doing this violence against Jews, and she finally throws up her hand in chapter 12, and finds the reason to be Jewish is in Daf Yomi. is in learning and what she does with other people and community engagement, and it's a positive agenda. So in the end, that's what she comes to at the end of the 12th chapter. That's how the book ends there. Let's go to page 5 of our screen share, Rhiannon. I want to just bring in Dara Horn's voice. So you've heard the Chabad voice. Okay, so I want to just read this piece over here. This is from her first chapter, which is about Anne Frank, of course. The line most often quoted from Frank's diary are her famous words, "I still believe in spite of everything the people are truly good at heart." These words are inspiring, by which we mean they flatter us. They make us feel forgiven for those lapses of our civilization that allow for piles of murdered girls. And if those words come from a murdered girl, well, then we must be absolved because they must be true. That gift of grace and absolution from a murdered Jew, exactly the gift that lies at the heart of Christianity, is what millions of people are so eager to find in Frank's hiding place, in her writings, in her legacy. It is far more gratifying to believe that an innocent dead girl has offered us grace than to recognize the obvious. Frank wrote about people being truly good at heart before meeting people who weren't. 3 weeks after writing these words, she met people who weren't. Here's how much some people dislike living Jews. They murdered 6 million of them. This fact bears repeating, as it does not come up at all in Anne Frank's writings. Readers of her diary are aware that the author was murdered in a genocide, but this does not mean that her diary is a work about, Rhiannon, if I could have page 7, please, thank you. Genocide. If it were, it is unlikely that it would have been anywhere near as universally embraced. And you remember, and we don't have to talk about it, but if you've read the book, you know that she then talks about other pieces that were written that are about genocide. And if you go down a little bit more, Rhiannon, so she talks about what would it mean for a writer not to hide the horror? There's no mystery here, only a lack of interest. You have probably never heard of another young murdered Jewish chronicler of the same moment, Zalman Gradowski. Like Frank's, Gradowski's work was written under duress and discovered only after his death, except that Gradowski's work was written in Auschwitz, and he talks about the details of the horror. So if you can come back to full screen. So, you know, her book, Dara Horn, is really a very different kind of voice from the Rebbe's. Again, she writes this book in 2021. The Rebbe's philosophy was a post-war philosophy. What do you think about Dara Horn's voice? And, you know, given Phyllis's concern about her granddaughter, given Paul's comments about his grandchildren, what about the Dara Horn voice? What do you think? Maddie, please.
I just wanted to say, as sort of as a postscript to the question you asked before about the value in educating our children, and that this ties in with it. Facing in History and Ourselves is an incredible curriculum that was started when our daughter Elizabeth was in the 6th grade. And it was piloted in Brookline and Newton, and very much a part of the 6th grade curriculum. I recently asked a current 6th grade teacher in Brookline, how is that curriculum being dealt with today or responded to today? And she said, we hardly teach it because we have there is such an emphasis on the math and science MCAS testing that has to be worked on, that's the social studies curriculum has been watered down. And one of the things that's been taken away from it, or a good piece of it, is, this is at least in Brookline, is facing history. So this is the reason why it's so important to continue the education. If a credible curriculum like that in a very liberal community like Brookline is moving it aside so that they can work on math and science, then we're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about current threats to caring about the Holocaust, to being educated about the Holocaust, you have what you just said, the emphasis on STEM, science, etc. You have the whole issue of systemic racism, which is so urgent in our country, and that not correctly and not properly, but in fact, it does take a lot of the bandwidth that kids have for issues of hate. It goes to Black Lives Matter. It doesn't go to the Holocaust. We're white. We're people of privilege. That's how the world sees it, and that our kids inhabit in high school and college. And then you just have, and I'm increasingly so concerned about this, is the crazy world of Uvalde and Buffalo and all these shootings, where the violence that we worry about is today. And the victims that we worry about are our children today going to school, or our churchgoers going to church, or our grocery shoppers going to the supermarket. And that just also feels like it's, you know, so the Holocaust has a lot of headwinds in terms of clearing space that people can actually think about it, which is perhaps why it's really good that Dara Horn wrote that book, to try to break through. Let me just close with this question. Oh, Arthur Walton, please.
Wesley, I think Dara Horn presents a point of view, and a not unrealistic point of view. But if one were to say to her, well, what shall we do about it? I mean, her response, it seems to me, is either not there or, well, let's study the Torah. Well, studying the Torah is a kind of withdrawal. It feels like she's saying, I withdraw. I pay no attention. And then out there as a sort of ancillary to these things, to the Holocaust, in a funny way, or much later ancillary, is Uvalde and Buffalo and Pittsburgh and San Diego and all of these places. And so that's very troublesome to me.
Well, in the end, Arthur, I think, and I think she actually even says this, okay? I think it's an irony of her book. It's a paradox of her book. She spends 12 chapters writing about people love dead Jews. And then she writes, I give up. I'm broken, I give up. And her move after I'm broken, I give up is Daf Yomi, is learning Torah. Because you remember in the chapter, she goes to a chapter about an exhibit at Auschwitz, about Auschwitz. And remember what she says about it, which is it's an excellent exhibit. It gets the details right. And if you don't know from Auschwitz, it teaches you from Auschwitz. And then she feels so broken because while it's accurate and while it fulfills a need, what does that actually do in our world today? It's, as she puts it, it sets the bar pretty high. If it's not the Holocaust, let it go. If it's not the Holocaust, you know, it's not the Holocaust. And then at the end of it, and this last page of that chapter is so haunting. She writes that there are swastikas in the public schools of American cities today, and the response is, it's not the Holocaust, it's just a swastika. And believe it or not, I mean, I don't know how many of you have kids or grandkids in the Newton public schools, but this is a significant problem today in Newton. There are a number of swastikas in Newton public schools. And our parents are always writing us, telling us they cannot get serious attention paid to that. That the response is basically, it's not the Holocaust, it's just a swastika. And this drives our parents crazy. And I know that, you know, we're trying to do a campaign to educate that it matters. But in the end, Arthur, she runs into this. And again, it was particular that as she tells her own story in her book, it was the chapters that would try to explain the context, why it was okay to be violent against Jews in New York and New Jersey. And after reporting that, she says, my best move is to learn Talmud. And that's what she does. That's how her book ends. And the question that I wrestle with all the time is, I don't really have a better answer than that. I mean, we're working on it, and we met with the mayor of Newton and a couple of weeks ago to talk about this, and we're working it through. But I don't know. I guess I would ask you, Arthur, what do you think is the best response to the reality of all this hatred, including, of course, anti-Semitism? I mean, if you're thinking about your grandchildren, and you want to balance their need to know and be educated with their desire to be inspired and want to pursue a Jewish life, how would you do it?
I don't have an answer for that, Wesley, but it's a question that I think about a lot, and I find myself frequently, frankly, terrified for my grandchildren.
Now, that's a strong word. Could you say more about terrified? For their physical well-being or for their spiritual well-being?
I think the answer to that question is yes. I think it's for both. I think the trends in this country threaten both the physical well-being of every Jew and the spiritual well-being of every Jew, and not just the Jews, but in particular the Jews.
And if your how old are your grandchildren, Arthur?
Well, they range in age from 34 to 13.
And if one of them that were open to your wisdom sought you out and said, Papa, Zeta, Grandpa, whatever you prefer to be called, I would like to do something to be helpful about this world that's so broken for Jews and so broken for Americans. What do I do? What would you say, Arthur?
Well, I'd probably say, think about getting politically involved.
And what would motivate that wisdom?
Well, I'm not so sure it's wisdom, Wesley, to begin with.
What would motivate that posture?
Because it seems to me that somehow you have to get to the root. You have to get to a point where you're at the root of an issue where you can deal with it at the roots. And it seems to me that that has to be done through the political system, and essentially through changing the people who are in our government.
Arthur, that is really helpful, and it raises a question that I want to throw to the class. Guess what? Guess what field is in a state of utter crisis in America? It's a field that is literally dying on the vine. Anyone want to take a guess? The rabbinate. The rabbinate is dying on the vine. Do you know how many rabbinical students are entering the Jewish Theological Seminary's class this coming year? A new batch of rabbis? 6, which is the smallest class in the history of the seminary. You know, the Ziegler's program that ordained Michelle used to have this whole campus, Mulholland campus, gorgeous, but they have such a small school and so few students. They sold this campus and now meet, you know, in a building like 1320 Center Street. And they were, as a result of which, they did this move, which was The seminary education tuition is $32,000. The Ziegler program is now $7,000. So that's if you're a young rabbinical student, which there's literally a handful, it's $32,000 at the seminary, it's $7,000 at Ziegler, because Ziegler sold its building or its campus because it had no students to justify it. And they're now meeting at 1320 Center Street, the equivalent of that in Los Angeles. A whole university campus meeting, above a laundromat, so to speak. And Cincinnati, which is the fountainhead of the Reform movement, closed its rabbinical school in Cincinnati, as you know. So I mention all that, Arthur, because your advice is so interesting and telling, which is young people, if they're interested in escaping the world, go into finance and hedge funds and private equity and financial security. And if they're not, they maybe go into politics, but very few are going into the rabbinate. And I'm wondering if any of you guys have, and this is a question that I think the Jewish community is just beginning to really reckon with. And by the way, that's half of it. There's very few rabbis coming in. And because of the pandemic, a lot of rabbis my age are retiring. So synagogues are finding that their older rabbis are aging out or retiring, and there just are not that many young rabbis. And I see Charlene sent a text or chat that the Hebrew College is growing. I don't know what the numbers are, but I will tell you there's very few rabbinical students, even at Hebrew College, who want congregational work, less than half. Most go into chaplaincy or Hillel work, etc. So there is something about, all of which to me cries out opportunity. I mean, I think it would be an amazing time to become a rabbinical student now, and an amazing time to reinvent the field. But there is something about this unsettled time in which we live, with the violence and the gun violence and all this stuff, that is creating uncertainty, etc. Anyone want to comment on that? And anyone want to comment on what you would tell your grandchildren if they asked you for wisdom about what kind of contribution they might make? So I want to just say, I guess it's good to have questions that are better than answers, because I feel like this whole field of the Rebbe and Dara Horn is a perpetual question that just got more interesting given the Uvalde and the state of the world. But I think that Dara Horn's answer in the end of Jewish learning is really good, because it gives you insights, it gives you timeless text to think about, but mostly it gives you people to learn with and community in which you can share those questions. So I just want to thank all of you for forming such a thoughtful community every Tuesday. And again, I want to thank Maddie for creating the space. Not sure what will be next year, if we'll be in person or on Zoom again. Well, the world will change 100 times between now and then. But I just want to thank all of you for learning every week. And in a hard world, this class has been a constant and steady blessing. So deep gratitude to all of you. And Maddie, I want to offer you the final words.
Thanks, Wes. I'd like to, as Wes just said, thank all of you for having faithfully zoomed in for the past 9 months to study and share your thoughts and ideas. And I too look forward to our coming together, finally in person, hopefully in the fall in the Gann Chapel. And I wish you all a good health and some good times to enjoy this beautiful spring and hopefully good summer weather. But last but not least, Wes, on behalf of Sisterhood and the presidents Joanne and Dahlia, and our entire Tuesday morning study group, I want to express our appreciation to you for your wisdom, your insightful teaching, and your passion for Torah. And as our collective expression of thanks for another exemplary year of learning, a gift has been made to the Rabbi's Fund in your honor. So thank you very much. Toda Rabba.
Maddie, thank you. Thank you so much, Maddie. Thank you so much, Sisterhood. Thank you so much, class. Let me just end by talking about what's next. 3 things to put on your calendar. Number 1, you want to be in shul this coming Shabbos, June 11th. Because if you're not in, if let's say you live in Seattle, you want to zoom in, because we all need inspiration. But can I just tell you this inspirational story? A couple of Sundays ago, we were having the end of year religious school assembly. And it was the last day of religious school for the year. And it was outside. It was a beautiful day. Remember, it was a very warm day and gorgeous day in a tent. Just like hundreds of people for the end of year assembly. And it was Eileen Beckman's last day. Eileen has been at the religious school for 23 years.
Wow.
So I asked the Kinderlach, what do you love about Mora Eileen? Hand after hand went up. And it's been a while, you know, our youngest is 27. So I haven't had a 7-year-old in my life in 20 years. And I forgot how smart 7-year-olds are. 7-year-olds get stuff, they understand stuff, and they are empowered to articulate their thoughts really coherently at the age of 7. And so kid after kid said, what I love about Mara Eileen is that she believes in me. And even when I make mistakes, she believes in me. And because she believes in me, it makes me want to believe in myself. And 7-year-olds would say, Mora Eileen makes me a better version of myself. And kid after kid after kid was saying this. Anyway, this coming Shabbos, we are saying a loving farewell to Mora Eileen, and there will be kids and parents who are going to celebrate. That will be inspiration. And then Saturday night is Shavuot, and we're having a tikkun. And actually, the main speaker is Dan Judson, who is at the rabbinical program at Hebrew College, and he is going to talk about the crisis of the American rabbinate. Why are people not going into the rabbinate, and why are the far fewer number of rabbis getting ordained not going into synagogue work? That's what he's going to talk about. And then finally, on Tuesday night at the Vilna Shul, guess who is the main speaker? Dara Horn. So if you can get to Dara Horn or look for the publicity, she'll be, I assume it will also be Zoomed or live streamed, but we've been talking about her so much. She's in town next Tuesday night. Class, thank you so much. And I look forward to continuing to learn Torah with you this weekend, throughout the summer, and next year. Lots of love, guys. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Rabbi.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.